actually going to make a drawing of an animal cell today and include some of the key components within an animal cell. You can find any of those parts within the notes found on Google Classroom, so if at any point you need to revisit what the function of that organelle or what it might look like, you'll find it within these notes. So let's recap what we talked about the last time. That was the type of cells that any living thing can have. So there are two types. There's prokaryotic cells and there are eukaryotic cells. So prokaryotic cells are the type of cells that would be found in, let's say, bacteria. And they're a little more simplistic. They do not have a membrane surrounding the nucleus. Whereas eukaryotic cells are the type of cells that make up plants and animals. They're a little more complex. They do have a membrane surrounding the nucleus. So let's take a look at those again. And you can see an obvious difference just quickly by looking at them. Eukaryotic cell, much more complex, very organized. You can see that membrane surrounding the nucleus. Whereas a prokaryotic cell, again, no definitive boundary around that nucleus. So those are the two types of cells that exist. Now, within any cell, the first thing that we're going to talk about is a cell membrane. So a cell membrane is a semi-permeable boundary that allows some things into the cell and some things out. So food and water can be brought into a cell and waste can be removed from the cell all through the cell membrane. So you can revisit that again in our notes. The first thing we talk about is the cell membrane. It's the outer boundary. It discusses what moves into the cell and what moves out. So let's get a scrap piece of paper and a pencil and let's start our drawing of an animal cell. All right, so there's no right or wrong shape to your animal cell. So we're going to just draw an outer boundary. And then every time we talk about a new organelle, we'll just add it to our picture. So we kind of have a visual of every time what an animal cell looks like. So we're just going to label this as our cell membrane. We're going to remember that it allows things in and out of the cell, and every cell, plant and animal, have a cell membrane. Now we'll discuss later that a plant cell has a extra protection around it, which is a cell wall, but we'll discuss that later. But they all have a cell membrane. Okay, so let's go back to our notes and let's talk about, well, what gives the cell its shape? Well, it's the cytoplasm inside of there. That's the main thing, that it's the gel-like substance that keeps everything moving, make sure the cell has a type of form, and it has all of the water, it has the different organelles, if you will, within it, and it's just that material inside the cell that continuously moves. So that is our next thing we're going to talk about, is the cytoplasm, and we're going to draw, and let's take a look at that as well. So again, there's not a particular color or anything like that, but you can see the cytoplasm. It holds the organelles there, it gives it its shape, it just kind of moves things along. Okay, so yeah, it's a pretty good picture of our cytoplasm. So let's go back to our drawing. And for our purposes within our drawings and within any kind of quiz or thing that we'll have, we'll just identify the cytoplasm by just a few little dots around within the cell. Okay. And again, remember the cytoplasm, it's a gel-like substance, but identified in our drawing by the little dot. Okay, so those are two things so far within our animal cell. Okay, so then we start thinking, well, what's in an animal cell? And there are all of these structures called organelles. And so if you think about a cell is like this little fine-tuned factory with all these little components that need to work together to make it functionable and to make it have a purpose and structure and function. So the first one that we're going to talk about is a nucleus, but let's first take a look at what are organelles.
Organelle means little organ. Organelles are the specialized parts of a cell that have unique jobs to perform. Let's start with the nucleus, the control center of the cell. The nucleus contains DNA, or genetic material. DNA dictates what the cell is going to do and how it's going to do it. Chromatin is the tangled, spread out form of DNA found inside the nuclear membrane. When a cell is ready to divide, DNA condenses into structures known as chromosomes. The nucleus also contains a nucleolus, which is a structure where ribosomes are made. After ribosomes leave the nucleus, they will have the important job of synthesizing or making proteins.
All right, so let's stop right there. Kind of gave you an idea of what they look like, a little bit about their purpose. So let's go back to our notes so we can revisit that and see that again. Okay, so a nucleus, it's just kind of like the brain of the cell. It directs all the activities within that cell. All right, and so within that, it's the largest organ within the cytoplasm. So let's go to our drawing, and we're going to identify the nucleus. Okay, and again, no particular place within that. We're also going to add the nucleolus. All right, and again, if you remember from the video, the nucleolus is the place where proteins are made. And we'll talk about that in the future, but for now, we are just going to identify the nucleus, okay? And so again, with a clearly defined boundary, we have our nucleus, okay? Now, when we also look at here, the nucleolus has the ribosomes, and then the chromatin are going to be our special strands of DNA. So all of us have a unique DNA that makes each one of us individual, and those things are going to be found in the nucleus. It's kind of like the blueprint, if you will, of the nucleus. So that would be part of our drawings. Okay, so there's a good picture of the nucleus. You can see the chromosomes within that, and then there's the nucleolus. It's a really good picture of that. Okay, now the next little video that I have, again, is a good explanation of what a chromosome is.
Organisms are composed of cells. Cells work like little factories doing all the jobs inside your body that are needed to keep your body functioning. Your body is made up of many different kinds of cells, such as skin cells, muscle cells, and nerve cells. Some cells look like squashed bricks, some look like donuts, and many have irregular shapes. However, every cell, no matter what its job, has the same basic parts. All human cells have an outer border that's the boundary of the cell, called the cell membrane. A liquid material called cytoplasm is inside the cell membrane, and there's a large structure suspended in the cytoplasm called the nucleus. The nucleus is the part of a cell that contains the genetic information. The nucleus is surrounded by a nuclear membrane that, like the cell membrane, makes a boundary around the nucleus. Now let's explore chromosomes.
Now I'm going to stop there, and depending on our time, if we were in a classroom setting, we would continue talking about this a little bit further. And then again, if this was a classroom lesson, what I would do at this particular stage is we have already discussed the parts of a microscope and how to handle them properly. And we have started our cell lab. And within this, we looked at thread, we looked at newspaper print, how the E is upside down. We've already done those things. So when we start talking about an animal cell, with our microscopes that we have here, we can look at our cheek cells. And with that, you're able to definitely see the cell membrane, and we can see the nucleus within our cells. So at this particular stage, after we've covered just these few things and we've done our diagram, we would have come over and the students would have been able to make a wet mount slide and look at their cheek cells within these. And then from there, they would answer the questions within the lab This has the directions, and then on the next page, they would be able to draw and label what they saw within the microscope. Now, if this were a virtual lesson, I would just continue on discussing the parts of the cell. So we would continue to cover the mitochondria, the endoplasmic reticulum, and all of their functions within. And so eventually we would have all of the parts of the cell drawing. So we would have all of those components, and we would continue on. And then again, all students would be able to go back and revisit all of the pages within on Google Classroom. So it identifies the endoplasmic reticulum, the Golgi bodies. It also talks about a few little key components, microtubules, centrioles, and things like that. And then also plant and bacterial cells and the few different kinds of organelles that they contain that would not be found in an animal cell. So we touch upon just the basic parts of the cell. And then if again in a classroom setting, once we have read about it, we've watched the various videos, we've done our drawings, we've practiced kind of quizzing one another with our drawings. If perhaps we were doing that, again, our textbooks and things have worksheets that go along with that, and some of them I make, some of them I think are of value, so I use. And so this would be a sample of a worksheet. And by this stage, I feel that they've seen all of the material and they would do a really good job being able to answer that. So that would be just an example of, I guess, both virtual and a classroom setting. So I guess that is a little bit of a snippet of how I would teach in my everyday classroom.